we are shifting our focus now over to some new topics on today's show. First off, on the Philadelphia Eagles, their owner, Jeff Lurie, mentioned the support that he has for Nick Sirianni recently during a time this offseason when people were trying to figure out, oddly enough, where Bill Belichick was supposed to go. There were reported suggestions that Philadelphia was very interested at some point this offseason and maybe exploring the idea of having Bill Belichick come in and be their head coach at some point in this season. It was understandable from one standpoint where Nick Sirianni and the Eagles, not just all on him, but this year, the way that they ended was far from the expectations for such a talented roster. And there was a few people that I'm sure, much like the report suggested, were, kind of opening up to the idea of Bill Belichick joining, but that never flourished into anything. And Nick Sirianni is going to be the coach going forward, but the security of his job is something that will be into question, by me included as well. I brought it up on this show, but this year is going to be a big year for him, and according to the Philadelphia Inquirer, owner Jeff Lurie still has confidence in Nick Sirianni that he believes he can be the real deal with the skills to become an all-time great for Philadelphia, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer, on how Jeff Lurie feels about Nick Sirianni going forward. And a little bit of a surprise for me. I just didn't expect those comments to come out. Of course, you want to support your coach going into such a big year, knowing that you retooled and revamped some of this roster, Saquon obviously being the biggest one, on the defensive side of the ball as well. And I think there was sort of a breakthrough in Nick Sirianni this year as well to kind of show some support for him as well, for my part, because I'm sure it was hard, that I talked about it last week, where he had to sort of swallow his ego, swallow his pride a little bit, and relinquish some of those play calling duties over to Kellen Moore coming in and really letting him take the reins of the offense now in 2024. It takes a bigger person to do that, honestly. I think a lot of coaches, like you see, maybe with Sean Payton, I think that's been the narrative around him a lot, that a lot of these coaches will die with their beliefs, with their system. They're not going to hear anything from anybody on trying to relinquish their duties or relinquish any sort of play calling responsibilities to anybody else. But Nick Sirianni, going above and just, not being too self-centered about it, he relinquished that and sort of taking a CEO type of role this year as a head coach and really letting Kellen Moore operate the offense, which I think will be beneficial for the Eagles. They need something fresh coming in after last year where the offense didn't look that smooth and that efficient, especially in the red zone. So I can support that. But the confidence that Jeff Lurie was showing in Nick Sirianni, I really wasn't expecting too much, because not only did he mention he sees him as an all-time great, but Marcus Hayes of the Philadelphia Inquirer wrote more on this topic and more on what Jeff Lurie said about Nick Sirianni. He said, according to Marcus Hayes, that Lurie still envisions Sirianni as his next Andy Reid, in his words, citing a former Eagles executive on how he views Nick Sirianni going forward. And also, Lurie even sees many of the same traits in Sirianni. He believes that Sirianni is a football nerd, a maniacal teacher, and a passionate leader with the capacity to become an excellent administrator, a skill that took Reid more than a decade to master. That is according to Marcus Hayes, on what Jeff Lurie says and believes about Nick Sirianni. Here, Anthony Manzano writes, for you, who is the most underrated veteran quarterback in college football? The same for the running back, receiver, and tight end. I am not too knowledgeable of college right now. The most underrated veteran quarterback, I'm trying to think right off the top of my head. Anthony Manzano writes, honestly, he's very awkward when he does his interviews talking about Nick Sirianni. Yeah, I do agree with that. Just on college football, I'm not too well versed in that range. I'd have to look into it a little bit more, just because I haven't touched on it in a while. But yeah, I do agree he's pretty awkward when he does his interviews talking about Nick Sirianni. So from that standpoint, I can sort of understand where he's coming from, but I think he went a little bit beyond, and that could play into that awkwardness you mentioned there. Talking about Andy Reid and thinking that he could have something there similar to Andy Reid is something, I can't really buy. I'm trying to reach to kind of see where he's coming from, but I think he might have overdone it there a bit because I can see him showing support to Nick Sirianni, especially after a rough season. But again, I can't jump on his side too much here. And also, Marcus Hayes continued to write on Jeff Lurie's beliefs about Sirianni by saying Sirianni still has a superb potential as long as the coach can spend some time removed from the demands of developing an offense, and that's where we were going. That's where we started this by mentioning and applauding Nick Sirianni really on taking that step back really from his duties on offense to focus on everything else that comes with being a head coach, because at times you could make the argument that there was a lot on his plate and how he handled everything. It might have been too much, and how some reports I know were out there that that the relationship he had with some of his coaches, arguing, just the way that it all worked out there, I'm not sure that it was as ideal, really, that you'd want on a championship level team, because all those things matter. The off the field interactions and how it all is run seriously matter, and how you make the differences between a championship team and a team that evidently just crashes out of the playoffs in the first round. But that's exactly what he's done. Kellen Moore now comes in as a new offensive coordinator with the experience, I think, most of all, to come in. He's had success with the Cowboys. He's had somewhat of success with the Los Angeles Chargers. I don't think you can be too worried about any concerns, really, with him coming in and Nick Sirianni sort of taking a step back. Anthony Manzano, where I live in Florida, I have a ton of Eagles fans around me, and they're starting to get tired of Nick Sirianni and his lack of adjustment during the games. Funny enough that I also have an Eagles fan that I am buddies with, and we don't really go too much into it, but I think a lot of times when it is brought up, Eagles fans and people, close that follow the team can acknowledge the fact that there is something missing there with Sirianni. I don't think you can put him too much in the conversation with some of the greats. To compare him to Andy Reid, I think right now is a bit of a stretch, but even like a Sean McVay, Andy Reid, John Harbaugh, Mike Tomlin even, I think it's hard to compare him to those guys because off the field and how they run things, it's different to Nick Sirianni and how ideally you'd want to do that, and the lack of adjustments as well, I think, just comes with him maybe having too much to do, and just ideally, that is something they went over this offseason and how it would probably be best if he took a step back. But it seems like Jeff Lurie likes the confidence. He is very confident in Nick Sirianni right now, and favoring him over someone like Bill Belichick was, I think, the right decision at the end of the day, going back to those reports that link Bill Belichick with this team, because to just not dump it all on, not just to dump it all on Nick Sirianni. He has been successful in his time with the Eagles. He has a 34-17 record, the highest win percentage in team history at 66%. But he has made the playoffs each year he has been the head coach and has reached the Super Bowl in his second season. He has helped develop Hurts for the most part, really, since they both came in at the same time. So he has brought in some good, but again, there are certainly some security questions with his job going forward, because you can make the argument, and I'm sure a lot of people do, when it comes to Sirianni and his lack of adjustments or anything like that, that he has a talented roster, and I think many people would think that a lot of coaches could be successful with A.J. Brown, Devontae, Dallas Goedert, Jalen Hurts, now Saquon, DeAndre Swift last year, and that offensive line that they had. That is something that, one, Sirianni can't control, having a great team, but I think it does hold a little bit of merit when you have a team like that, because it is really hard to have or be bad with a team like that, especially in the NFC East. But Anthony writes, I see a lot more Kyle Shanahan in terms of success in playoffs. Yeah, both of them, similar situations, have a great team around them. They get there, but sometimes they just do fall short. And also, and I don't think that the way Bill Belichick coaches fits the mentality of the Eagles fan base. Yes and no. I think it is cutthroat, and I think Bill Belichick is a little cutthroat to go with along with those fans. But yes, in terms of the fact that I think Eagles fans now, with the roster that they have, want to see more of a modern offense, and I just don't think Bill Belichick is too versed in that area where I think he's going to bring more of an old school mentality, more so on being strict to his system. Like I mentioned before, with a guy like Sean Payton, all these old school coaches, I believe that they're married to their traditional systems, and I agree with you that Bill Belichick might not fit that way in terms of having an offense that Eagles fans can sort of accept. But overall, the way Jeff Lurie talks about Nick Sirianni and the confidence that he has in him, I think will be a major determinant on this year and how it all plays out, because it all depends on the results. Quite honestly, no one will really care about how Sirianni coaches or anything like that if this team wins. And because obviously they didn't have a great year, all those conversations and all the criticism was a lot louder. So this confidence could pay off, and he could look like a genius if they go out and win the Super Bowl this year, and they have a great chance of doing so. But again, there is that pressure there because now you have to perform. There's really nowhere you can run because of Jalen Hurts signing that extension. They're not going to get rid of him. So if you underperform again, it will be, unfortunately, Nick Sirianni who will have to move on because Eagles fans are going to demand something changes, and it's going to have to be Sirianni. So there is that pressure, but they have the weapons in place where they could be successful this year and very much compete in an NFC that's going to be super exciting to watch and super competitive as well. But I do see your question. I will get to that after. I do have to go to a break right now, but when we return, the last topic we're going to talk about is Minnesota and how they see this Sam Darnold dynamic going, envisioning a revival similar to that of Geno Smith in Seattle. Is that selling themselves short, or is that the right way of going about things? I'll answer that question when we return after this short break.